a whisker away from home. The scent of damp earth and fish hung heavy in the air, a far cry from the overflowing bins Lunar usually frequented. But desperation had driven her here, to the banks of the wide, muddy river. Tucked behind a tangle of weeping willow branches, she spotted it, a discarded cardboard box, miraculously dry. It smelled faintly of old apples, a sweet, comforting aroma. It wasn't perfect, but it was shelter. Exhaustion clawed at her, each breath a monumental effort. The world swam. With a final surge of strength, she pushed herself into the box and began to pant. Hours blurred into a symphony of pain and primal instinct. Then, a tiny mew, followed by another, and another. 3 small bodies, wet and trembling, nestled against her. Pip, the firstborn, a charcoal smudge against the faded cardboard. Squeak, already living up to his name with insistent cries. And Patches, a mosaic of browns and creams, silent and watchful. Lunar licked them clean, her tongue rough but gentle. A deep, rumbling purr vibrated in her chest, a sound she hadn't made in moons. It was a lullaby of relief, of fierce, protective love. The kittens, instinctively, nudged closer, seeking warmth and the comforting rhythm of her heart. She watched them suckle, their tiny paws kneading her belly. The river gurgled nearby, a constant, almost hypnotic sound. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lunar felt a fragile peace settle over her. They were safe. Here, by the river, they were home. A sudden rustle in the undergrowth shattered the illusion. Lunar's ears perked, her body tensing. It wasn't the familiar scuttling of mice. This was heavier, deliberate. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows beyond the willow branches. A glint of metal flashed between the leaves. Her purr died in her throat. Something was out there, and it wasn't friendly. The shadow by the river. The damp cardboard offered little comfort against the river's chill breath. Lunar shifted, trying to burrow deeper, to shield her babies from the creeping cold. Pip, the charcoal runt, kneaded blindly at her belly, his tiny claws snagging in her fur. Squeak, ever the vocal one, emitted a plaintive mew, demanding more sustenance. Patches, a mosaic of browns and creams, remained silent, his large, unfocused eyes watching the world with an unsettling stillness. Exhaustion pulled at Lunar, a heavy weight threatening to drag her under. A long shadow fell across the opening of the box. It was deeper and darker than any shadow cast by the meager moonlight. Lunar tensed, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Her instincts screamed danger. A hand, calloused and rough, reached into the box. Lunar lashed out, claws extended, but the hand was too quick. It grasped her scruff, yanking her upwards with brutal force. A strangled yell escaped her as she was lifted, dangling helplessly. Terror clawed at her. She twisted, desperate to break free, but the grip tightened, cutting off her breath. Below, she saw her kittens, 3 tiny bundles of fur, their mouths open in silent cries. Pip, disoriented, tumbled clumsily. Without a word, without a sound other than Lunar's desperate struggles, she was flung. The air rushed past her, cold and unforgiving. Then, the shocking plunge into the icy water. The river roared, a relentless torrent pulling her under. The breath was stolen from her lungs. Above, on the bank, 3 tiny voices erupted in a chorus of panicked cries. Pip's desperate mewls blended with Squeak's insistent demands and Patches' silent, wide-eyed terror. They were alone. Suddenly, a powerful form burst onto the scene. A magnificent German Shepherd, its fur gleaming in the moonlight, tore down the bank and plunged into the river without hesitation. Tiny paws, helpless hearts. Pip, Squeak, and Patches were a shivering knot of fur. The cardboard box, once a safe haven, felt like a prison after their rough journey. They huddled together, tiny bodies trembling, seeking warmth that wasn't there. The air was damp and cold, a stark contrast to the cozy nest they remembered. A strange, gurgling sound drew their attention. Peeking over the edge of the box, they saw it, the river. And in the river, struggling against the current, was Lunar. Her head bobbed precariously above the water, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored their own. A collective whimper escaped the kittens. Pip, the boldest of the three, felt a surge of panic. He scrambled towards the edge of the box, his tiny claws scrabbling against the cardboard. He wanted to reach her, to pull her to safety, but the riverbank was too far, the drop too steep. Frustration bubbled inside him, a helpless rage at his own inadequacy. Squeak, usually the quietest, began to meow. Loud, desperate cries filled the air, a plea for help that only the uncaring wind seemed to hear. Each meow was laced with terror, a raw, unadulterated sound of loss. Patches, overwhelmed by the sight of his mother's distress, burrowed deeper into the huddled mass of his siblings. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the image of Lunar fighting the relentless water. His small body shook uncontrollably, a silent testament to his fear. The gurgling grew louder, closer. Lunar was nearing the bank, but her movements were growing weaker, more erratic. The kittens watched, frozen in terror, their helpless hearts aching with a love they were powerless to express. Then, a blur of brown fur, much larger than any of them, appeared at the river's edge. A large canine German Shepherd jumped into the water. It swam powerfully toward Lunar, reaching her in seconds and dragging her to the shore. Lunar collapsed on the bank, gasping for breath, but she was alive. Struggling against the current. The water slammed against Lunar, a relentless, icy fist. Each stroke forward felt like a futile attempt to climb a waterfall. The far bank, fringed with the blurry green of weeping willows, seemed miles away, a mocking promise of safety. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat, making it hard to breathe. Kittens. The thought flashed, a beacon in the churning water. Fur as soft as dandelion clocks, tiny mouths mewling for milk, trusting eyes that followed her every move. She pictured them huddled together in the hollow beneath the shed, waiting. She couldn't leave them. Driven by the image, Lunar kicked harder, her pores churning the water. But the current was a monster, stronger than her fear, stronger than her love. It tugged at her, dragging her further downstream, towards the bend in the river where the water snarled around submerged rocks. A wave crashed over her head, forcing her under. Lunar fought her way back to the surface, gasping for air. Her lungs burned. Her muscles screamed in protest. She coughed, sputtering out river water that tasted of mud and despair. Each movement was agony, a monumental effort against the implacable force. How much longer could she fight? Just as her limbs began to grow heavy, a dark shape surged into the water beside her. A large dog, a German Shepherd, powerful and sleek, swam towards her with focused determination. It reached her, and she instinctively grabbed at its thick fur, fear mingling with a desperate hope. The dog didn't hesitate, turning its head and beginning to swim back towards the bank, towing Lunar along with surprising strength. A bark in the distance. The tennis ball soared through the air, a bright green blare against the backdrop of the late afternoon sun. Max, a magnificent German Shepherd, stretched his powerful legs, eating up the ground with effortless grace. He snagged the ball mid-bounce, the familiar scent of rubber and slobber filling his nostrils, and spun back towards his human, tail wagging furiously. He dropped the ball at her feet, panting happily, his dark eyes shining with adoration. Good boy, Max. You're the best fetcher ever, as she praised, ruffling the fur behind his ears. He nudged her hand with his wet nose, eager for another throw. A faint sound, almost lost in the gentle rush of the nearby river, pricked his ears. It was high-pitched, frantic, and laced with a desperate fear. Max froze, his playful energy instantly dissipating. The tennis ball lay forgotten at his feet. He tilted his head, his ears swiveling, trying to pinpoint the source of the distress. There it was again, clearer this time, a chorus of tiny, desperate meows. Pip's voice, though small, cut through the fear. Lunar! Where are you? Answer me! Squeak could only manage a series of plaintive cries, each one a tiny dagger of despair. He huddled against the cold, damp earth, his whiskers twitching, his heart pounding. Patches was hidden deep beneath a bush, the leaves offering scant comfort. He trembled uncontrollably, his eyes wide with terror, unable to make a sound. Max whined softly, a low rumble in his chest. He knew that sound. It was the sound of kittens in trouble. He glanced at his human, but she was busy scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the unfolding drama. He whined again, louder this time, nudging her leg with his nose. She chuckled, scratching him behind the ears. All right, one more throw. But Max wasn't interested in the ball. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He dropped the ball, his gaze fixed on the thicket of trees that lined the riverbank, the source of the heartbreaking cries. His instincts, honed by generations of herding and guarding, screamed at him. He had to investigate. A hero's leap. The high-pitched cries clawed at Max's ears, overriding the familiar sense of the woods. It wasn't the playful yelps of the neighbors' puppies, or the frustrated squeaks of a trapped squirrel. This was a desperate, thin sound, laced with a fear that resonated deep in his canine soul. Kittens. He bolted. The undergrowth whipped at his fur as he tore through the trees, his powerful legs eating up the distance. The scent of damp earth and river water grew stronger, guiding him onward. The cries intensified, now punctuated by a frantic splashing. He burst from the tree line onto the muddy bank. Woof! 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 His barks ripped through the air, a primal alarm bell. He knew his human was somewhere nearby, tending to the vegetable garden. This was an emergency. Then he saw her. Lunar. She was caught in the swift current of the river, her small body struggling against the relentless pull. Her head bobbed precariously, disappearing beneath the surface before resurfacing with a gasp. The kitten's cries were coming from the far bank, a chorus of terror-stricken pleas. They were helpless. He didn't hesitate. The icy water looked treacherous, a swirling brown monster, but he couldn't stand by. He gathered his haunches beneath him, muscles coiled like springs. This was more than instinct. This was a fierce, unwavering purpose. With a mighty leap, he launched himself into the churning water. The cold shocked his system, stealing his breath, but he pushed forward, his powerful strokes carrying him toward the struggling cat. Every ripple, every eddy was a challenge, but the sound of those desperate cries spurred him on. Lunar needed him. Against the rushing tide. The icy water seized Max, a frigid fist squeezing the air from his lungs as he went under. He churned his legs, battling a relentless current that threatened to swallow him whole. Downstream, Lunar's dark head bobbed, her faint cries swallowed by the river's deafening roar. Each pull was an ordeal, the unforgiving flow a solid wall against his progress. Reaching her brought a spark of warmth against the encroaching cold. Lunar. Got you, he managed, striving for calm. She trembled uncontrollably, her small frame shaking against his. He nudged her, angling them toward the distant bank. "Swim, Lunar, swim. Shore's that way." But the river was a cruel adversary, tugging at Lunar, wresting her away from his grasp, from safety. He scrabbled at the water, summoning every reserve to combat the surging torrent. His muscles screamed, his lungs burned, and the penetrating chill worked its way deep into his core, yet surrender was unthinkable. He pressed on, encouraging Lunar with gentle shoves and reassuring barks. The bank felt impossibly far, a hazy beacon in the swirling gloom. Waves crashed over them, momentarily blinding and choking. He tasted grit and earth, the river attempting to suffocate him. A tendril of doubt snaked into his resolve, whispering insidious questions. Could he possibly succeed? Was his strength sufficient? He looked at Lunar, her eyes wide pools of terror, clinging to him in desperation. Her very existence hinged on his actions. The realization sparked a new surge of resolve. He would not fail her. He would defy the river until his strength gave out. Lowering his head, he drove forward against the implacable tide and swam. Safe on the shore. Max's pores scrabbled against the slick mud of the riverbank. One more surge, muscles screaming, and he had her. He dragged Lunar, limp and dripping, onto the shore. Her fur was plastered to her thin frame, and she shivered violently. He nudged her, whimpering, until her eyes fluttered open. She coughed, a weak, rattling sound, and tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Max whined again, a deep rumble of concern. Lunar collapsed onto the damp earth, utterly spent. "Mamar!" Pip's desperate cry pierced the air. He launched himself from the hollow beneath the overturned wheelbarrow, a grey blur of fur. Squeak, smaller and frailer, trailed behind, his plaintive meows filled with terror. Patches remained hidden, a trembling shadow in the darkness. Pip reached Lunar first, burying his face in her wet fur. "Memar, Memar, you're back." Squeak, emboldened by Pip's bravery, joined him, his tiny body vibrating with relief. They both began to purr, a shaky, uneven chorus of gratitude. The sound seemed to seep into Lunar, bringing a flicker of life back to her dull eyes. She managed a weak lick at Pip's head, then nuzzled Squeak. The warmth of their small bodies, the comforting rumble of their purrs, chased away some of the icy chill that had gripped her. Slowly, she curled around them, a protective circle of sodden fur. Max watched, his chest aching. He nudged Lunar one last time, a silent promise to stay close. The kittens needed their mother. He needed to make sure they were safe. He settled down beside them, a large, watchful guardian against the encroaching darkness. The river still roared, a constant reminder of the danger they had escaped, but here, on the shore, with Lunar and her kittens huddled together, there was a fragile sense of peace. A sense of hope, however small, that maybe, just maybe, they would all be all right. He would do everything in his power to make sure of it. A forever home. Max panted, his tongue lolling, but his eyes never left Lunar and her tiny family huddled on the riverbank. He nudged Pip closer to Lunar with his nose, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. He could hear the distant wail of a siren, growing louder, and a knot of worry tightened in his stomach. Would they be safe? Then, a familiar voice cut through the night. "Max! Max, boy, where are you?" Relief washed over him in a warm wave. He barked, a short, sharp sound that echoed across the water. A flashlight beam danced through the trees, finally settling on him. "Max! What in there?" His owner, Tom, rushed towards him, his face etched with concern. He stopped short when he saw Lunar and the kittens. "Good boy, Max. You found them. You saved them." Tom knelt, his voice thick with emotion. "You're a hero, Max, a real hero." He gently stroked Max's head, then turned his attention to Lunar. "Poor girl, you must be freezing." Tom carefully scooped up Lunar and the kittens, Pip and Squeak mewing weakly. Patches remained hidden, trembling in the shadows. Tom coaxed the last kitten out, his voice soft and reassuring. "Come on, little one, you're safe now." He wrapped them all in a thick, warm blanket he'd pulled from the car, creating a makeshift nest. Lunar nuzzled into the soft wool, a low purr rumbling in her chest. The sirens stopped nearby. 2 paramedics approached cautiously. Tom explained quickly, gesturing towards Max and the blanket-wrapped family. They nodded, their faces softening with understanding. Soon, they were all bundled into the back of Tom's SUV, the heater blasting. As they drove away, Lunar lifted her head and looked at Max, her eyes shining with an unspeakable gratitude. She seemed to understand that he was the reason they were all safe, together. Max met her gaze, his tail thumping softly against the seat. He knew, somehow, that everything was going to be all right. They arrived at Tom's house, a small, cozy cottage with a flickering fireplace. Tom carried Lunar and her kittens inside, placing them gently on a plush dog bed near the hearth. The warmth seeped into their chilled bodies, and Lunar stretched, finally relaxing. Pip and Squeak, and even Patches, began to nurse contentedly. Max settled down beside the bed, his ever-watchful eyes fixed on his new family. This was it, he thought. A forever home, for all of them.